Why was she always the one they put on the roof? The question drifted through Alina Rossel's mind as she lay motionless on the crumbling concrete, 13 stories above a city that wanted her dead. Not because it was the most dangerous position, not because she had volunteered, but because when things went wrong, and in Zabad, things always went wrong, someone had to be far enough away to see it coming. Someone had to watch the team die from a distance and be unable to stop it. That someone was always her. The wind at the top of the Alsafar Hotel wasn't a breeze. It was a current of heat carrying the stench of diesel and sewage from below, thick enough to taste even through the cloth wrapped around her face. She'd been lying here for 3 hours. 3 hours without moving more than her trigger finger. 3 hours of watching heat signatures bloom and fade through her scope like ghosts in a graveyard. Her body had become part of the building, a statue draped in thermal netting that broke her outline into nothing, invisible to everything except her own thoughts. Through the scope, the world was rendered in shades of green and black, a city stripped to its essential truth. The living glowed, the dead were cold shadows, and somewhere between those two states existed the people she was supposed to protect. Sierra 1, radio check. Her whisper was barely a breath, the boom mic hovering millimeters from her lips, close enough to catch sound but not the fog of her exhale. Read you 5 by 5, Viper. Miller's voice came back clear, confident, a man who believed the mission would go exactly as planned. He was 3 blocks east, stacking up on a doorway with 6 other SEALs, about to breach a building and grab a high-value target. A man named Al-Assad who financed weapons shipments that killed Americans. Tonight, his financing days were over. We are at the breach point. Hold overwatch. Solid copy. I have eyes on the courtyard. 2 military-aged males armed patrolling the perimeter. No joy on rooftop sentries. The words came out of her automatically trained responses from 1,000 rehearsals, but her mind was elsewhere. It was calculating angles, distances, wind drift, the million variables that existed between intention and outcome. A sniper didn't just pull a trigger. A sniper became the trigger. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought was part of the equation. She had killed 14 men in her career. She knew that number the way some people knew their children's birthdays. 14 faces she could still see when she closed her eyes. 14 men who had woken up that morning believing they would see another sunrise. She wasn't proud of it. She wasn't ashamed. It simply was, a ledger she carried, a debt she paid with sleepless nights and a quiet voice that asked the same question in the darkness. What if you miss? Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The muffled thump of a flashbang echoed across the rooftops. Through her scope, Alina watched thermal blooms flare inside the target building, white-hot signatures of men moving, shouting, going down. The operation was smooth. Textbook. Miller's team was inside, clearing rooms with the practiced efficiency of surgeons cutting away disease. She should have felt relief. Instead, her pulse quickened. Something was wrong. Not wrong in a way she could articulate. Not wrong in a way that would justify breaking radio protocol. Just wrong. The city was too quiet. The streets too empty. In a place with 2 million people crammed into bomb-damaged buildings, silence wasn't normal. It was the held breath before a scream. Tally 1 Sentinel, East Roof. Her voice dropped an octave, the tone that meant someone was about to die. A figure had appeared on an adjacent rooftop, an RPG launcher settling onto his shoulder, the tube angling down toward the courtyard where her team was exposed. She didn't wait for confirmation. The rules of engagement were clear, proof of imminent threat to life. This qualified. She exhaled slowly, a controlled release that emptied her lungs completely. Her heartbeat slowed. The reticle settled on the man's center mass, steady as a compass needle finding north. Her finger applied 4 pounds of pressure to the trigger. Not a pull, a squeeze. The difference between those 2 words was the difference between life and death. Crack thib. The suppressed rifle coughed, a sound like a cough in a library, barely audible beyond 10 meters. The bullet crossed 600 meters in under a second. Through the scope, she watched the heat signature jerk violently backward, the RPG tube clattering uselessly onto the concrete. No scream. No drama. One moment a man was alive. The next he wasn't. Splash 1, East Roof. She cycled the bolt, the brass casing ejecting with a metallic ping that sang briefly in the night air before falling silent. "Good effect, Viper," Miller said, his voice tight with adrenaline. "We have the package, securing for exfil, get ready to move." Alina didn't relax. The hairs on the back of her neck were standing up, a primitive alarm that predated language. She scanned the horizon, sweeping her scope across rooftops, alleyways, windows. Movement. There, North Sector. Multiple vehicles rolling fast through the streets, converging on the extraction point. "Command, this is Viper. I'm seeing movement in Sector North. Multiple vehicles, looks like a QRF. Copy Viper, extract bird is inbound. ETA 2 mics. Get the team to the LZ." She swung her scope toward the landing zone, a wide, dusty traffic circle surrounded by high-rises. Every window a potential sniper nest. Every rooftop a possible mortar position. She'd argued against this LZ in the planning phase, said it was too exposed, too obvious. She'd been overruled by men who preferred convenience to caution. "Miller, that LZ is compromised. I see glints in the windows overlooking the circle. Abort the primary." "Negative, Viper. We have a golden hour window. We are moving." She wanted to scream, wanted to reach through the radio and shake him. But she didn't, because that's not what professionals did. Professionals followed orders, even bad ones, and tried their best to keep people alive despite the decisions made by those who were too far away to die for them. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the ambient noise of the city. A shrieking whoosh that cut through the air like a chainsaw through silk. "RPG, 9 o'clock high." The warning left her throat a split second too late. In the distance, the Black Hawk helicopter banked low, beginning its landing flare. Then it shuddered. An orange flower of flame bloomed near the tail rotor, petals of fire expanding against the gray sky. The machine spun, a metal bird with broken wings, and plummeted straight into the center of the traffic circle. Time didn't slow. That was a myth. Time compressed into a singular moment of horror where every detail was crystalline and immediate. The rotor blades shattering, the fuselage crumpling like aluminum foil, the secondary explosion as fuel ignited, the black smoke rising like a column holding up the sky. "Mayday, Mayday, Super 6-1 is down." The radio exploded into chaos, voices overlapping, screaming, calling for help that wasn't coming. Alina watched heat signatures swarming toward the crash site from every direction. Dozens of them. Maybe 50. Her team was pinned in the open, wounded and outnumbered. She checked her magazine, 4 rounds. She checked her belt, 2 spare magazines. She was 600 meters away, alone, with no backup coming. Miller's voice cut through the chaos, a ragged gasp fighting through pain. "Taking effective fire from all sides. We are pinned at the crash site. We need cover." Alina stared at the swarm of hostiles converging on her team. 4 rounds against 50 men. The math was simple. The math was impossible. But what else was there? Leave them, watch them die? No, not an option, not ever. "Hold on," she snarled, racking a fresh round into the chamber. "I'm engaging." She wasn't just a sniper anymore. She was the only thing standing between her team and a massacre, and that had to be enough. The shot that took down the first hostile felt clean, clinical. A centermass hit at 500 meters, the insurgent dropping mid-stride as he rushed toward the crashed helicopter. 1 down, 49 to go. The second shot was harder. The target was moving, weaving between cover, but she led him perfectly, the bullet intercepting his path like a mathematical certainty. He collapsed behind a pile of rubble. 2 down, 48 to go. The third shot missed. A gust of wind she hadn't accounted for, or maybe her calculations were off, or maybe the universe simply decided that perfection couldn't last. The bullet sparked off concrete 5 feet from its target. The insurgent dove for cover, shouting something in Arabic she couldn't hear but understood perfectly. Sniper. Find her. Kill her. She was no longer invisible. 3 windows across the street lit up with muzzle flashes. Green tracers arced toward her position, converging like laser pointers searching for a target. The round snapped overhead, punched into the concrete lip of the roof, kicked up sprays of pulverized stone. She rolled back from the edge-breaking line of sight, her heart hammering against her ribs. Viper status, Miller's voice. I'm taking fire, repositioning. She crawled across the roof, dragging her rifle, making for the southern corner. A different angle, a different field of fire, but the damage was done. They knew she was up here now. Every gun in the city would be looking for her. She reached the southern ledge and peered down. The crash site was worse than she'd imagined. The Black Hawk was a burning skeleton, flames licking up from the fuel tanks, thick black smoke creating a toxic cloud. Her team, what was left of them, had formed a defensive perimeter around the wreckage. She could see them through the scope, bloodied, limping, dragging wounded teammates into the meager cover of the helicopter's hull. A heavy machine gun opened up from a building to the east. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of a DSHK, a Russian-made beast that fired rounds the size of a man's finger. It chewed through the thin aluminum of the helicopter like it was paper, sparks flying, metal screaming. One of her teammates went down, clutching his leg. Alina lined up the shot. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind a concrete wall, only his head and shoulders visible. It was a 700-meter shot with wind gusting from the west. She adjusted for drift, elevated for drop, and squeezed. The suppressor coughed. The man's head snapped back. The machine gun went silent. Good kill, Viper, Miller gasped. But there's more coming. We need to move, but we have 3 wounded. I need you to clear us a path. A path? He wanted her to clear a path. Through a city full of hostiles with 4 rounds left. She almost laughed. Almost. But then she looked at the terrain, really looked at it, and an idea formed. Not a good idea, not even a smart idea, but an idea. The street leading away from the crash site was a narrow corridor flanked by buildings on both sides. If she could force the hostiles to funnel through that corridor, make them hesitate, make them think twice about advancing, she could buy her team time. She scanned the buildings. Most were bombed out, structurally unsound, already half-collapsed from previous airstrikes. And then she saw it. A building on the east side with a significant crack running up its facade, the kind of damage that meant the structure was barely holding together. Miller, I need you to move west down the main street when I give the word. Don't stop. Don't look back, just run. Copy, standing by. Alina aimed at the base of the cracked building where the structural damage was worst. She fired. The round punched into the weakened concrete. Nothing happened. She fired again. A small chunk of masonry broke free, tumbling down. She fired her last round. This time the crack widened, spiderwebbing across the entire front of the building. For a moment everything held. Then physics took over. The building groaned, a deep guttural sound like a dying beast. The facade peeled away, tons of concrete and rebar cascading down into the street. The collapse kicked up a massive cloud of dust that rolled through the corridor like a gray tsunami, obscuring everything. Hostiles caught in the avalanche screamed. Others scattered, diving for cover, their advance halting in confusion. Now Miller, go. She didn't wait to see if they made it. She rolled away from the edge, ejecting her spent magazine, slamming in a fresh one. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from exertion, from the knowledge that every second mattered and there were never enough seconds. But something else caught her attention. A sound, a low, mechanical rumble that vibrated through the building beneath her. She knew that sound. Everyone who'd served in the Middle East knew that sound. It was the diesel engine of a T-72 main battle tank. Her blood turned to ice. Tanks didn't just appear. They had to be staged, prepositioned, waiting for exactly this kind of scenario. which meant this wasn't a spontaneous ambush. This was a trap, and her team had walked right into it. She crawled back to the edge, peering down through the scope. The dust was beginning to settle, revealing the street below. And there it was, rolling through the debris like a prehistoric predator, its turret swiveling toward the crash site. A Soviet-era T-72, 40 tons of armored death, its main gun capable of punching through concrete walls like they were cardboard. Her team had nothing that could stop it. Anti-tank weapons were back at base. The only thing between that tank and the complete annihilation of her team was her, and she had a rifle that couldn't even scratch its paint. The tank commander's hatch opened. A man in a dirty uniform popped his head up, scanning the street, shouting orders in Arabic. Alina centered the reticle on his face. It was an impossible shot over 800 meters downward angle moving target, but impossible was just another word for difficult. She steadied her breathing, found the rhythm of her heartbeat, and waited for the space between beats. That's where the shot lived, in the silence between life and death. She squeezed. The man's head snapped back. He slumped forward over the hatch rim. The tank stuttered, slowing momentarily as the crew inside realized their commander was dead. But it didn't stop. Someone else took control. The turret continued its rotation, the main gun lining up on the crash site. Alina's mind raced. She couldn't stop the tank with her rifle, but maybe she didn't have to stop it. Maybe she just had to distract it, make it focus on her instead of her team. It was a terrible plan, a suicidal plan, but it was the only plan she had. She aimed for the vision blocks on the turret, the small glass windows the crew used to see outside. She fired 3 rapid shots, each one striking a different block, spiderwebbing the glass. The tank lurched, the turret swinging wildly, searching for the threat. Then it found her. The barrel elevated, tracking upward, centering on her building. For a moment she stared down that massive gun barrel, a black void that promised oblivion. She'd seen what tank rounds did to buildings. They didn't just penetrate, they erased. If that gun fired, the entire top floor of the hotel would cease to exist, and her along with it. "Alina, what are you doing?" Miller's voice crackled in her ear, frantic. "Buying you time," she said softly. "Get to the secondary extract point, don't stop. We're not leaving you. You don't have a choice." She fired again, this time at the tank treads, knowing it would do nothing but hopping the sound would keep the crew focused on her. The round sparked off the armored track. The turret steadied. The tank had made its decision. It was going to kill her first, then finish off her team. The main gun fired. The world became sound and pressure. A freight train roaring past her head. The round missed barely, screaming over the rooftop and detonating against a building behind her. The shock wave slammed into her back, lifting her off the ground and throwing her forward. She hit the concrete hard, the rifle skittering away. Her ears were ringing so loudly she couldn't hear her own breathing. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. She crawled toward her rifle, her hands numb, her vision swimming. The tank was reloading. She had maybe 15 seconds before it fired again. 15 seconds to do something. Anything. Her hand closed around the rifle stock. She dragged it toward her, blinking away the dust and blood in her eyes. And that's when she saw it. Lying in the rubble near the edge of the roof. An old Soviet PKM machine gun. The kind the insurgents loved because it was simple, reliable, and could chew through anything. It must have been left by the fighter she'd killed earlier. The belt of ammunition was still attached, glinting dully in the fading light. An idea sparked in her oxygen-starved brain. Not a sniper's idea. A desperate, insane idea. But desperation had a way of breeding innovation. She crawled to the PKM, grabbed it by the carry handle, and dragged it to the ledge. The weapon was heavy, awkward in her hands. She'd trained on enemy weapons before, but never in combat, never when her life depended on it. Her fingers found the charging handle. She racked it, chambering the first round. The tank was almost finished reloading. She could see the loader inside through the open hatch, slamming the breech closed. Alina didn't aim. She couldn't aim. The PKM didn't have optics, just crude iron sights. She pointed the barrel at the tank and pulled the trigger. The weapon roared to life in her hands, bucking like a wild animal trying to escape. Brass casings flew out in an arc, tumbling through the air. The tracers, every fifth round glowing red, streaked down toward the tank like falling stars. Most of the rounds sparked harmlessly off the armor, but some found gaps, vision slits, hatches, weak points. The tank flinched, not because she was hurting it, but because she was annoying it, making it angry, and an angry tank crew made mistakes. The turret swung back toward her, faster this time, desperate to silence this mosquito that wouldn't stop stinging. The coaxial machine gun opened up, spitting bullets that tore into the concrete around her. She ducked, pressed herself flat, kept firing. The PKM was overheating in her hands, the barrel glowing cherry red. Smoke rose from the receiver, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Then she heard Miller's voice, faint through the ringing in her ears. Alina, we're clear, disengage. She let go of the trigger. The gun fell silent, barrel hissing, metal pinging as it contracted. She lay there on the roof, chest heaving, tasting blood and cordite. Below, the tank sat idle, its crew probably arguing about whether the threat was neutralized or just reloading. She didn't give them time to decide. She rolled away from the edge, grabbed her rifle and ran. Running at 13 stories up wasn't the same as running on the ground. Every step felt like it could be her last. The concrete beneath her feet cracked and unstable, threatening to give way. She burst through a doorway into the hotel's interior, a dark warren of destroyed rooms and collapsed hallways. The building had been gutted by previous fighting, walls blown out, floors sagging, the smell of decay and burnt plastic thick in the air. She needed to get down, get distance between herself and the tank, find another position where she could still support her team. But the stairwell was compromised. She'd seen it earlier through her scope. The entire central column collapsed into a twisted heap of concrete and rebar. The only way down was through the maintenance shaft, a narrow vertical tunnel meant for electrical and plumbing work. She found the access panel on the wall, kicked it in, and stared down into darkness. A rusty ladder descended into shadow. It looked ancient, held together by prayer and corrosion. She slung her rifle across her back, grabbed the first rung, and started climbing down. The metal groaned under her weight. Each rung felt loose, wobbling in its mounting brackets. She moved quickly, not because she wanted to, but because staying still felt more dangerous than falling. Her hands were slick with sweat and blood. The ladder swayed. Below her, the shaft extended down into absolute darkness. If she fell, she wouldn't know until she hit bottom. 3 floors down, she heard voices. Not over the radio. Actual voices echoing up through the shaft from below. Arabic, shouting, the sound of boots on concrete. The insurgents had entered the building. They were searching for her, room by room, floor by floor. The hunter had become the hunted. She froze on the ladder, holding her breath, listening. The voices were getting closer. She could hear them systematically clearing rooms, kicking in doors, shouting clear. In their own language. They'd find the maintenance shaft eventually, and when they did, she'd be trapped in a vertical coffin with nowhere to go. Think. She looked up, looked down, saw another access panel 2 floors below, partially open, light bleeding through the gap. That was her exit. She descended quickly, hand over hand, her shoulders screaming with the effort, reached the panel, kicked it fully open, and tumbled out into a corridor just as she heard voices directly above her in the shaft. The floor she'd emerged onto was the 11th. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on both sides, most blown off their hinges. She moved fast, rifle up, checking corners, found a room with a window facing the street, looked out. The tank was still there, turret rotating slowly, searching. But it wasn't alone anymore. 3 technical trucks had arrived, pickup trucks with heavy machine guns mounted in the beds. They were setting up a perimeter around the crash site, creating a kill zone. Her team's window of escape was closing fast. Miller Sitrep, she whispered into her radio. Static, then his voice weak, strained. We're 2 blocks west of the crash site moving through the Sauk. 4 wounded, mobility compromised. I've got hostiles on our 6. We need that secondary extract, Alina. Where's our ride? QRF is 5 mics out, she lied. She had no idea when the quick reaction force would arrive. Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. But her team needed hope more than they needed truth right now. She scanned the street looking for a way to help. The technical trucks were the biggest threat, mobile gun platforms that could chase her team down and shred them with heavy fire. If she could take them out or at least disable them, it would buy precious minutes. But she was running low on ammunition. 4 rounds left in her current magazine. 1 spare. 50 rounds total, against an enemy that now numbered in the dozens. The math wasn't in her favor. It never had been. She settled into a shooting position by the window, using the frame as support. Picked her first target, the gunner on the nearest technical, standing exposed in the truck bed, hands on the machine gun, scanning for targets. An easy shot, maybe 200 meters. She put the reticle on his chest and fired. The man dropped. The technical's crew scrambled, diving for cover, unsure where the shot had come from. 1 problem solved, 2 more to go. She shifted to the second technical. This crew was smarter. The gunner had taken cover behind the weapon's shield, only his head visible. She aimed for the engine block instead. Put 2 rounds into the radiator. Steam erupted, white and hissing. The truck died, smoke pouring from under the hood. 2 down, 1 to go. The third technical was already moving, the driver slamming the accelerator, racing away from the kill zone. She tracked it through her scope, leading the target, calculating speed and distance. Fired, missed. The truck swerved. She cycled the bolt, ejected the casing, chambered another round. Fired again. This time she hit the rear tire. The truck fishtailed, rubber shredding, but it kept going, limping away on the rim. Good enough. She pulled back from the window just as return fire chewed into the wall where she'd been standing. Green tracers cut through the room, punching holes in the plaster, sending dust cascading down. They'd spotted her muzzle flash. Time to move again. She ran for the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, descending fast. Had to keep moving, had to stay unpredictable. That was the only way to survive when the odds were this bad. Reached the 9th floor, then the 8th. Her legs were burning, her lungs screaming for air, but she couldn't stop. The voices were behind her, echoing in the stairwell, getting closer. On the 7th floor, she stopped. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. Her body was giving out. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fatting, leaving behind exhaustion and pain. She stumbled into a room, pressed her back against the wall, tried to catch her breath. Her radio crackled. "Alina, we've got a problem," Miller's voice. "We're pinned down in the market square. Heavy fire from multiple positions. We can't move forward, can't move back. I need you." She closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them again. "I'm coming." She checked her rifle, 3 rounds left. She checked her sidearm. 1 magazine, 15 rounds. She checked her body, bruised, bleeding but functional. She'd been in worse situations. Probably, maybe. She couldn't actually remember being in a worse situation, but that didn't matter. Her team needed her. That was all that mattered. She moved to the window, smashed out the remaining glass with the rifle butt and looked out. The market square was 2 blocks away. She could see muzzle flashes, hear the rapid crack of rifle fire. Her team was somewhere in that chaos, fighting for their lives. And she was too far away to help, too far to make a difference. Unless... She looked down at the street directly below, then looked at the building across from her. The gap was maybe 10 meters, 12 at most. The adjacent building's roof was lower, maybe 1 floor down. If she could get there, she'd have a clear line of sight to the market square, a perfect overwatch position. But to get there, she'd have to jump, across a gap that would kill her if she missed, landing on a roof that might collapse under her weight. It was insane, reckless, exactly the kind of decision that got people killed. She took 3 steps back, checked the distance again, calculated the trajectory, the angle of approach, the margin for error, which was zero, no second chances, no do-overs, just physics and commitment. She heard boots on the stairs, close now, maybe one floor below. She was out of time, out of options, out of everything except one terrible choice. Alina ran, sprinted toward the window, hit the sill and launched herself into empty air. For a moment she was flying, weightless, free. The city spread out beneath her, a mosaic of fire and shadow. The wind pulled at her clothes, her rifle, her hair. Time stretched, compressed, existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Then she hit the opposite roof. Her boots slammed into concrete, her knees buckled, she tucked into a roll to bleed off momentum, came up hard against an air conditioning unit. Pain exploded through her shoulder, but she was alive. She was across. She'd made it. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the night sky, the stars barely visible through the smoke. Somewhere in her brain, a voice was screaming that she was insane, that jumping between buildings was how people died. But she'd done it, and now she had to make it count. She crawled to the edge of the roof and looked down at the market square. The scene was chaos, stalls overturned, fabric awnings torn and burning, bodies scattered like discarded toys. In the center, behind a low wall, she could see her team. 7 figures, some standing, some lying down, all of them firing at targets she couldn't quite see. She brought up her rifle, scanning for threats, found them immediately. Insurgents moving through the ruins, flanking positions, trying to surround her team. She counted 12, maybe 15, too many. But that had been true all night and she was still here, still fighting. She put the reticle on the closest hostile. Center mass, squeezed, the rifle kicked, the man dropped. She cycled the bolt, found another target, fired. He went down too, last round. She made it count. A headshot at 300 meters, the insurgent collapsing mid-stride. Magazine empty. She ejected it, let it fall, pulled her last mag from her belt, slammed it home. 5 rounds. That was all she had left in the world. 5 chances to make a difference, to save her team, to do the job she'd been trained for. She fired, and fired again, and kept firing until the rifle clicked empty and there was nothing left to give. But it wasn't enough. She could see more hostiles moving in. The cordon was tightening. In minutes, maybe seconds, her team would be overrun, and she was out of ammunition, out of tricks, out of time. Then Miller's voice came over the radio, breathless, desperate. "Alina, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you're still out there, thank you for everything. You gave us a chance. That's more than we had a right to ask for." She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him to keep fighting, that help was coming, that they weren't finished yet. But the words wouldn't come, because she didn't believe them anymore. They were going to die here, all of them, in this forgotten city, on this forgotten mission, and no one back home would ever know how hard they fought. She looked at her empty rifle, then at the street below, and then at something else, something that made her pulse quicken with a hope so fragile it hurt. Lying in the rubble next to a burned-out car was an unexploded bomb, a Mark 82 500-pound aerial bomb, its tail fins bent, its olive-drab paint scorched but intact. A gift from a previous airstrike that had never detonated, a piece of pure destructive potential just sitting there, waiting. And 30 meters away, rolling slowly toward her team's position, was that damn tank. Alina smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized that sometimes the universe gives you exactly one more chance, and you either take it or you die wondering what if. She picked up her rifle, not to shoot, she had no ammunition left, but she still had one bullet, the one that mattered most, the one she'd been saving without knowing it, the one that would end this. She just had to hit a bomb from 40 meters away with a tank shell bearing down on her position. Easy. What does it feel like to know you're about to die? Alina had always wondered, thought about it during training, during quiet moments between deployments, during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. She'd imagined it would be terrifying, a panic that swallowed you whole. But now, crouching on this roof with a tank rolling toward her team and one impossible shot standing between survival and annihilation, she felt nothing close to fear. She felt clear. Clear in a way she'd never experienced before. Every sound, every sensation, every detail of the world around her became sharp, present, immediate. The rough concrete beneath her boots, the weight of the empty rifle in her hands, the smell of smoke and cordite hanging in the air, the distant sound of Miller shouting orders to his team. All of it existed in perfect, crystalline focus. She moved to the edge of the roof, careful to stay low. The tank was 70 meters from her team now. 60. The turret was rotating toward the market square, toward the low wall where 7 Americans were making their last stand. She had maybe 30 seconds before that gun fired. 30 seconds before the 125mm cannon erased her team from existence. The unexploded bomb was still there, lying in the crater like a sleeping giant. She traced the angle with her eyes. Tank to bomb, bomb to her position. The geometry was brutal. She'd have to shoot from an elevated angle downward, compensating for gravity and wind drift. And she'd have to hit the bomb's casing in exactly the right spot, penetrate the metal skin, detonate the explosive filler, all with a single round from a rifle that had 0 bullets. Except she did have one bullet, the one in the chamber, the one she'd kept, forgetting in the chaos to fire it, or maybe not forgetting, maybe saving it unconsciously for exactly this moment. She checked the scope. The lens was cracked from the earlier explosion, spiderweb fractures distorting the image. She could barely see through it. Using the scope would be like trying to shoot through a shattered windshield. She popped the rear lens cover off, breaking it free. Looked down the barrel instead. No magnification, no reticle, just crude iron sights and the hope that 12 years of training would be enough. The tank was 50 meters from her team, 40. She could hear the diesel engine roar as it accelerated, crushing debris beneath its treads. The turret stopped rotating. The gun was lined up. The loader would be shouting up. The gunner's finger would be on the trigger. 3 seconds, maybe 2. Alina shouldered the rifle, exhaled, found the bomb in the rubble, centered it between the iron sights. She didn't have time to calculate windage, elevation, Coriolis effect. She had time only for instinct, for the thousands of hours spent on ranges, in simulators, in the field, for the muscle memory that lived deeper than thought. She fired. The rifle kicked against her shoulder one last time. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It crossed the space between her and the bomb in less than 1/10 of a second. She watched it fall, the arc barely visible, a dark needle against the smoke-filled sky. It hit the bomb dead center. For a moment nothing happened, just a small spark where metal met metal. Alina's heart sank. A dud. The bomb's filler had degraded, or the round hadn't penetrated deep enough, or she'd simply been unlucky in a night full of bad luck. Then the world turned white. The explosion wasn't a sound. It was a force, a wave of overpressure that slammed into the city like the fist of God. The 500-pound bomb detonated with the fury of a small sun, vaporizing everything within 10 meters. The tank, which had been 5 meters from the crater, caught the full force of the blast. The shock wave lifted 40 tons of Soviet steel into the air, flipping it like a toy. The turret tore free from the hull, cartwheeling through the air, trailing fire and smoke before crashing through the wall of a building 3 blocks away. The blast wave rolled outward. Windows shattered. Walls crumbled. The technical trucks that had been converging on the market square were blown over, tumbling end over end. Insurgents caught in the open were thrown backward, ragdoll bodies flying through the air. The sound that followed, a deep, chest-crushing boom, rattled the very foundations of the city. Alina had no time to celebrate. The overpressure from the explosion hit her building like a wrecking ball. The entire facade of the structure peeled away, concrete and rebar collapsing inward. She felt the roof lurch beneath her feet, felt gravity shift as the floor tilted. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The building was coming down. She hit the deck, covered her head with her arms, and prayed to God she wasn't sure she believed in. Debris rained down, concrete blocks, steel beams, glass. She felt something heavy slam into her back, driving the air from her lungs. Felt something else strike her leg, a sharp pain that made her vision go white. The roar of the collapse was deafening, drowning out everything else. Then it stopped. The noise, the movement, everything stopped. She lay in darkness, buried under rubble, unable to move. She tried to take a breath, but her chest wouldn't expand. Something was pinning her down, something heavy. She pushed against it weakly, her arms shaking with the effort. It didn't budge. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Not in a firefight, not taking a bullet, but crushed under the weight of a building I destroyed myself. There was a bitter irony to it. She'd saved her team by creating an explosion that killed her. The math had finally caught up. The impossible odds she'd been fighting all night had collected their debt, and she was too tired to be angry about it. She closed her eyes, let the darkness take her, accepted it. At least Miller and the others would make it out. That was enough. It had to be enough. Then she heard something, a voice, faint, distant, calling her name. "Alina, Alina, can you hear me?" "Miller." She tried to respond, but her throat was caked with dust. She coughed, a wet, painful sound, tasted blood. "She's here, I've got her signal. Move this rubble now." Hands. She felt hands digging through the debris, pulling away concrete chunks, lifting beams. Light appeared above her, dim and gray, but light nonetheless. Faces appeared in the gap. Miller's face, covered in soot and blood, eyes wild with relief. "I've got you," he said, his voice cracking. "I've got you." They pulled her out, dragged her from the rubble pile, laid her on what was left of the street. She stared up at the sky, at the smoke clouds painted orange by fires, and tried to understand that she was alive, that somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. A medic appeared, cutting away her gear, checking for wounds. She felt pressure on her leg, heard someone calling for a tourniquet. The pain was starting to register now, pushing through the shock, sharp, insistent, real. "Miller," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He knelt beside her, grabbed her hand. His grip was strong, warm. "Don't talk, save your strength." "The team." "Everyone's alive, wounded but alive because of you." His voice broke. "You saved us, Alina. You saved all of us." She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him it was her job, that she was just doing what anyone would have done. But the words wouldn't form. The exhaustion was too heavy, the pain too loud. She let her eyes close, let herself drift. The last thing she heard was the sound of helicopters. A beautiful sound. The cavalry arriving just a little too late to be useful, right on time to take them home. She smiled, tasting blood and victory in equal measure. The helicopter ride was a blur. Fragments of sensation disconnected from context. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades. The smell of hydraulic fluid and blood. Voices shouting medical jargon she couldn't quite process. Someone cutting away her uniform. The sharp sting of an IV going into her arm. Hands checking her pulse, her pupils, her wounds. She floated in and out of consciousness, her mind unable to hold onto any single thought for long. Images flashed. The tank exploding. The building collapsing. Miller's face staring down at her. She tried to piece them together, tried to construct a narrative that made sense, but the fragments wouldn't connect. Blood pressure dropping, someone shouted. "Get me another bag of saline." "Stay with us, Chief, stay with us." She wanted to tell them she wasn't going anywhere, that she'd survived worse. But her mouth wouldn't work. Her body felt heavy, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She watched the ceiling of the helicopter pass by overhead, the metal panels vibrating with each turbulent pocket of air. It reminded her of something, a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Then darkness again, not the terrifying darkness of dying, just the comfortable darkness of sleep. Her body finally demanding rest, demanding that she stop fighting for just a moment and let someone else carry the weight. When she woke, she was no longer in the helicopter. She was in a bed, clean white sheets, fluorescent lights overhead, the sterile smell of antiseptic. A hospital, a field hospital probably. She could hear the distant sound of generators humming, feel the slight vibration of a climate control system working overtime against the desert heat. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her leg, her ribs, her shoulder. She gasped, fell back against the pillow. Easy, a voice beside her. A nurse, young, tired, kind eyes. You've got a fractured femur, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion. Moving is not advised. Alina stared at the ceiling, processing this information. Fractured femur. That explained the leg. Broken ribs. That explained the breathing. Concussion. That explained why the world felt slightly tilted, slightly wrong. My team, she managed. Miller, the others. The nurse smiled. They're all alive. Most of them are down the hall, actually, been asking about you every hour. She adjusted Alina's IV, checked the monitors. You're a hero, you know, word spreading all over base. The sniper who took out a tank with a rifle, it's already legendary. Alina closed her eyes. Hero. The word felt hollow. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd gotten lucky, who'd made a series of desperate choices and survived by the thinnest of margins. One wrong calculation, one gust of wind, one moment of hesitation, and she'd be in a body bag instead of a hospital bed. How long have I been out? She asked. 18 hours. You were in surgery for 6 of those. The doctors said you're lucky. The femur fracture was clean, should heal fine with pins and rehab. Lucky? There was that word again. Alina wanted to laugh, wanted to ask what part of being blown up by an explosion she'd caused qualified as lucky, but she didn't, because compared to the alternative, she supposed luck was exactly what it was. Can I see them? She asked. My team. The nurse hesitated. Doctor's orders are bed rest, but, she glanced at the door, then back at Alina. I'll see what I can do. She left. Alina lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the mission in her mind. It already felt distant, unreal, like something she'd watched in a movie rather than lived through. But the pain was real. The exhaustion was real. The weight of 14 men, no, 15 now, was real. 15 faces she'd never forget. The door opened. Miller walked in, followed by 3 other team members. They looked rough, bandaged, bruised, moving stiffly, but they were alive, all of them. Alina felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Miller pulled up a chair beside her bed, sat down heavily. He looked at her for a long moment, not saying anything. Then he smiled. You look like hell, Chief. You want to talk, she said, her voice hoarse. Fair point, he gestured to the others. We wanted to thank you, all of us. What you did out there, he trailed off, shook his head. There aren't words. You saved our lives, multiple times, against odds that were, I don't even know what to call them. Impossible, one of the other SEALs said. The odds were impossible. And yet here we are, Miller said, because you refused to accept impossible as an answer. Alina looked at them, at these men she'd bled for, and felt emotion welling up that she couldn't quite name. Pride, relief, gratitude that they'd made it, all of the above probably. I was just doing my job, she said quietly. Bullshit, Miller said, but there was no anger in it, just fierce conviction. Your job was to provide overwatch, to take shots from a secure position. What you did went so far beyond that it's not even in the same universe. You jumped between buildings. You used enemy weapons. You brought down a building. You shot an unexploded bomb to take out a tank. He leaned forward. That wasn't your job, Alina. That was something else entirely. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The brass wants to debrief you, Miller continued. When you're ready, they're talking about commendations, medal recommendations, the whole 9 yards. He paused. But that's later. Right now, I just wanted you to know that we see you, not as the sniper on the roof, not as a tool in the toolbox, as one of us, as family. The word hit harder than she expected. Family. She'd never thought of it that way, never allowed herself to, because families could be lost, could be ripped away in an instant of violence. She'd kept herself separate, kept herself distant, believing it was safer that way, that it would hurt less if the worst happened. But sitting here, looking at these men who'd fought beside her, who'd refused to leave her behind, she realized distance hadn't protected her at all. It had just made her lonely. These men were her family, whether she'd admitted it or not. And that was worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth nearly dying for. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she could manage. They stayed for a while longer, talking about nothing important, sharing bad jokes and worse hospital food complaints. Normal things, human things, things that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with being alive. Eventually, the nurse chased them out, insisting Alina needed rest. They left reluctantly, promising to visit again tomorrow. Alina lay back, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the mission, to the choices she'd made, to the thin line between survival and annihilation. She thought about the bomb, about the shot, about the fact that if she'd been 1 degree off, 1 meter miscalculated, the explosion would have killed her team instead of saving them. How did you live with that kind of responsibility? How did you carry the knowledge that people's lives depended on your ability to be perfect under pressure? She didn't have an answer, didn't think there was one. All she could do was what she'd always done: train harder, shoot straighter, be ready for the moment when everything went wrong. Because in this line of work, everything always went wrong. The question wasn't whether, it was when, and whether you'd be good enough, strong enough, lucky enough to survive it. She closed her eyes, let exhaustion finally take her. As she drifted off, she thought about the conversation she'd overheard in the helicopter. Someone asking how one sniper could do so much damage, and someone else responding with a truth that felt right. "She didn't do damage," the voice had said. "She created a corridor where death walked and her team walked out alive." 3 weeks later, Alina stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her dress uniform. The fabric was stiff, unfamiliar after so long in combat fatigues. The leg brace beneath her slacks was uncomfortable, a reminder that healing took time no matter how much you wanted to rush it. Her ribs still ached when she took deep breaths. The concussion headaches came and went, sharp reminders of the building that had collapsed on her. But she was alive, and today she had a ceremony to attend. The brass had moved quickly: commendations, medal recommendations, a promotion waiting in the pipeline. They'd flown her back to the States for the ceremony, insisting that what she'd done deserved recognition at the highest levels. She'd argued against it, said she didn't need medals for doing her job, but no one listened. The military loved its heroes, especially when those heroes came with clean narratives and dramatic action. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that she didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd survived when she probably shouldn't have, who'd made choices based on desperation and necessity, not valor, who'd gotten incredibly, impossibly lucky and was now being celebrated for that luck. But arguing was pointless. So she straightened her ribbons, made sure her cap was positioned correctly, and prepared to play the role they needed her to play. The ceremony was held in an auditorium on base. Rows of chairs filled with personnel, officers in dress uniforms, civilians from various oversight committees. A stage at the front with flags and podiums and all the trappings of official recognition. Alina sat in the front row, feeling exposed, wishing she could disappear into the crowd. Miller sat beside her, along with the other members of the team. They'd all been decorated as well: bronze stars for valor, purple hearts for wounds sustained. Good men who'd fought hard and earned every bit of recognition they received. But the spotlight today was primarily on Alina, the sniper who'd created the death corridor. The commanding officer took the stage, began reading citations in that formal, stilted way that made heroic actions sound like bureaucratic reports. He talked about enemy engagements, about tactical decisions, about the successful completion of the mission despite overwhelming odds. He made it sound clean, strategic, noble. He didn't mention the fear, the exhaustion, the moment when she'd been buried under rubble, certain she was going to die, the weight of 15 faces that would never leave her memory, the nightmares that woke her up in the hospital, drenched in sweat, hearing the sound of the tank's engine in her dreams. War wasn't clean. It wasn't strategic. It was messy and brutal and scarring in ways that didn't show up on medical reports. But you couldn't say that at a ceremony. Couldn't admit that the hero they were celebrating was just a woman who'd been terrified and desperate and lucky. Her name was called. She stood, walked to the stage, feeling every eye in the room tracking her movement. The commanding officer shook her hand, pinned the medal to her chest. More words, more formality, applause that felt too loud, too enthusiastic for what she'd actually done. She stood there, rigid, accepting it all because that's what you did. You accepted recognition gracefully, even when you didn't feel you deserved it. Even when you knew the real story was more complicated than the narrative being presented. When it was over, when the ceremony ended and people filed out, Miller caught up with her in the hallway. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Liar," he smiled slightly. "It's okay to not be fine, you know, after everything." "I'm fine," she repeated, more firmly this time. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if you ever want to talk about any of it, I'm here. We all are." She appreciated the offer, even if she couldn't imagine taking him up on it. What would she say? That she was haunted by the shot, that she kept replaying the moment in her mind, wondering what would have happened if she'd missed, that sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced she was back on that roof. No, you didn't burden other people with that. You carried it yourself. That was the job. "I know," she said. "Thank you." He left and she stood alone in the empty hallway, staring at the medal on her chest. It was beautiful in its way. Brass and ribbon, carefully crafted, symbolizing valor and sacrifice and all the ideals they fought to protect. But it was also just metal, just a thing that couldn't capture the reality of what she'd experienced, couldn't hold the weight of the choices she'd made or the lives that hung in the balance. She thought about the death corridor, about the street littered with bodies, vehicles, debris, about the path she'd carved through fire and steel, a narrow channel of survival in a city designed to kill them all. It had worked. Her team had walked out alive. But at what cost? 15 men were dead because of her. 15 men who'd woken up that morning expecting to see another day. They'd been enemies, yes, threats that needed to be neutralized. But they'd also been human beings with families, with histories, with futures that were now gone. She'd taken those futures, had to take them to protect her own team, but that didn't make it easier to carry. A voice in her head, her own voice but different, quieter, whispered the question she'd been avoiding. Was it worth it? She didn't have an answer, wasn't sure there was one. All she knew was that when faced with the choice between her team dying and her taking the shot, she'd chosen the shot, would make the same choice again, and would carry the weight of that choice for the rest of her life. Maybe that's what made her different. Not that she was fearless or superhuman or any of the other things people wanted to believe, but that she was willing to carry that weight, to make the impossible choices and live with the consequences, to stand on the roof while everyone else was on the ground, knowing that distance came with a price. She walked outside into the sunlight, letting the warmth touch her face. The base was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the chaos of Zabad. Birds sang in nearby trees. A flag snapped gently in the breeze. Normal things, safe things, things worth protecting. And that, she realized, was the answer. Not a perfect answer, not a complete answer, but enough of one to keep moving forward. They weren't fighting to create death corridors or win medals or write heroic narratives. They were fighting to protect these quiet moments, these ordinary days where nothing exciting happened, and that was exactly the point. She thought about the 14 faces, no, 15 now, that she carried. Thought about how she'd once wondered if she was proud or ashamed of that number. She still didn't know. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the complexity of it, the weight of it, was what kept her human. What reminded her that every shot mattered, every choice had consequences, every life, enemy or friendly, had value. She'd killed 15 men to save 7. The math was brutal, but it was the math she'd been given. And she'd solved the equation the only way she knew how, by being better than impossible. By refusing to accept that the mission was over, that her team was lost, that there was nothing she could do. Sometimes dignity didn't speak. It didn't explain or justify or make grand speeches. It simply acted, made the hard choices, carried the weight, kept moving forward even when every muscle screamed to stop. She looked down at the medal one more time, then tucked it away in her pocket. It wasn't the recognition that mattered. It was the knowledge that when it counted most, when lives hung in the balance and the odds were impossible, she'd been exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. And if that moment came again, and in this line of work it always came again, she'd be ready. Not because she was fearless, but because some things were worth the fear, worth the pain, worth standing alone on a rooftop and betting everything on one impossible shot. Her team was alive. That was the only math that mattered. Everything else was just noise. She walked across the base, past the formations and the flagpoles and the gleaming buildings that represented order and discipline and purpose. Somewhere out there, in another city in another country, another team was stacking up on another door. Another sniper was climbing to another rooftop. Another impossible situation was developing. And somewhere, someone would have to decide whether to take the shot or walk away, whether to create the corridor or watch from a distance, whether to be the hunter or the witness. Alina knew which one she'd always choose, not because she wanted to, but because when you were given the gift and curse of being good at something that saved lives, you didn't have the luxury of walking away. You carried the rifle, you climbed the roof, you took the shot. And you lived with the consequences, one face at a time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes in the space between one breath and the next, between one heartbeat and another, a single choice changes everything. Not because it was easy, not because it was right or wrong or heroic or tragic, but because it was necessary. And in war, necessity doesn't ask permission. It simply demands that you be ready when the moment comes, that you've trained enough, thought enough, suffered enough to do what needs doing without hesitation. Alina had been ready. The city of Zabed was proof of that. The death corridor was proof of that. The 7 men who walked out alive were proof of that. And somewhere, somehow, that had to be enough.